Well guys, we're gonna get the NSX back, but unfortunately it's not a finished product yet because there's still issues with the car that we now have to go and figure out, fix, and bring back to him to get it tuned again. But the car made like 490 wheel on 93, around 12 psi, but some pretty major issues. We're dropping voltage, we're dropping fuel pressure, and the intake temps are skyrocketing. We got those things fixed before we can turn up the power, before we can even really drive it as a finished product, because right now it's just, I guess, a little bit better than the base map that it came with, but pretty major issues that we now gotta figure out. Now we gotta drive 8-hour round trip to go get the car. Kinda sucks, but Derek is a great tuner and he's diagnosed it very well, gave me incredible explanations as to what needs to be done, why it needs to be done, and that's all I can ask for. Well, we're stuck in huge traffic. This is not fun. Not a fun day at all. First of all, the welds that were on my passenger trailer fender, they've been like slowly cracking off, and they finally just broke off, and I totally forgot to fix it before this drive. And I had to pull the fender off completely. I tried to JB weld it like in a pinch from an auto parts store, but it's been raining and I didn't have anything to like hold it in place, so it wouldn't settle properly. It takes like 5 to 10 minutes for it to really cure, enough for it to hold on its own. I couldn't do that, so I just took the fender off, and now we're stuck in this huge traffic. We're like 3 hours behind schedule. I'm not excited to do this, you know, with the issues with the car and the rain and the traffic and the trailer issue. It's just been such a crappy day. This damn NSX is causing me so many problems. I think this might be the last time I buy a 90s car that's like highly customized, because it is just causing me non-stop money, non-stop time, non-stop stress. It's bad. I wish it was just done already, and no matter what I do to this car, there's always another issue with it. It's like 2 steps forward, freaking 10 steps back. Just picked up the NSX, we're loading it on the trailer. Gotta bring it home and figure everything out. Like 8:20 right now. We were supposed to be home at 7:40 and we're still 40 minutes from home, so I picked the absolute worst day to be doing this, because it was supposed to stop raining after like 9 a.m. and it's been raining all day. We are unloading the NSX off the trailer again. So as you guys already know, we could not get the tune completely finished on the NSX. It's actually nowhere even near completion. No fault to the tuner whatsoever. Derek, the owner there, actually did an incredible job with diagnosing all of the issues, telling me what's wrong with the car. Basically, because he doesn't do any mechanical repair work or wiring or things like that, he stopped offering those services a long time ago. He spent the whole time, I think he had the car for just about a week. He probably spent 3 or 4 days, I don't know exactly, working on the car and going through the settings on the Haltech and just trying to familiarize himself with it, look out for any issues that would be critical. And instead of going for like, you know, full-blown power, he wanted to make sure that at a baseline the car was healthy and was safely able to be turned up in power. So he sent me a huge email actually, diagnosing all the issues that he could find, along with the recommendations for the fixes, what parts I should buy, and explanation as to why it's a critical repair or a feature to add to the car, or parts, whatever it might be, before we can safely get this thing completely tuned and do some remote tuning before we bring it back to Derek to get the final dyno tune on 93, and also to do the E85, because we dropped off 10 gallons of the 1-ethanol S, which is 112 octane, pure 85%. I'm gonna pull out my phone, we're gonna go through the email and just talk about it in depth as to all the issues that the NSX still has outstanding. So you can see my passenger side fender is completely off. Bolt down there to hold the fender in place, and then in the front there's these welded brackets, and it slides into the grooves like a notch, and then the fender is held in place. To take it off, you loosen that bolt, and then the fender slides right out. The issue with the other side, these welds, I don't know who did these welds. This was a used trailer. This is 3 years old though, and the welds were broken on here, and I guess because the fender lost all support, all the weight transferred to the back, and every time this thing hits a bump, it further cracked the rear welds. Luckily, I had to meet someone at Home Depot 30 minutes into the drive. I tried to get some JB weld. You can see how sketchy this looks right now and how piss poor job I did attempting to fix it, but my mind was all over the place. Very, very bad day for me. This bracket failed first, and you can see I tried to JB weld it. You guys, don't criticize me for this. I was doing this in the pouring rain at some auto parts store in Jersey that I stopped at. Because the first time I went to Home Depot, I got some solder, metal solder, and that wasn't working. I had a heat torch with me, and I was using that for the solder, but the solder wouldn't stick to the metal. And I've really never done this before, and I'm terrible at welding, so I literally have zero skill in doing any of this metal repair. But in a pinch, I was trying to do that. Then I stopped at an auto parts store, and I got JB weld, and I didn't have anything to hold this bracket up in place. So me trying to hold it steady for 10 minutes while the JB weld cured, plus the rain pouring onto it, this thing would not stick. So I had a tape gun in my truck and just tried to tape this on, but because it was raining, nothing would stick. So that's what I was dealing with. And then in the back, the weld started to fail. Luckily the tape held that on, but yeah, this fender was swaying left to right every time I hit a bump. So God forbid the fender flew off on the highway, and it's a big aluminum fender. Like if a car or truck hits that, they're most likely gonna crash, and that could have caused a huge pileup, and I probably could have went to jail or something for that. But yeah, so I decided let's just take the whole fender off, put it into the truck. Luckily I have the truck with an empty trunk right now. I threw it in the back, and we just drove the whole way without a right fender. So on top of all the trailer issues, we had the traffic, like I said, and we left here at 9. We didn't end up getting to the shop until I think 3 o'clock. And then I talked to Derek for about 15 minutes. Then we spent about 20 minutes or so loading up the car onto the trailer. Loading it is always more time consuming than taking it off, just because you gotta put it onto the, align it onto the trailer, pull it up in the right positioning. I had to measure the tongue weight because I've never done that before. And I bought this tool. It's actually really cool. It's a tongue weight scale. This thing right here. So you just stick this underneath the ball of the trailer. So you have to load the car onto the trailer first because it's attached to the truck. You don't want to have the trailer not hooked up to anything when you're loading it, because all the weight's in the back. This thing will come off the ground. So make sure it's hooked up to the truck. Then what you have to do is raise up the hitch, raise up the trailer off the ball, and then pull the truck a little bit forward and put this thing, scale, underneath the coupler, and then lower the jack onto the scale. And it ended up being at the 550 pound mark, which is just about 11% of the total trailer weight with the car on it. And rule of thumb, you want to be anywhere between 10 and 15% tongue weight on the front of the trailer when loaded. And that's like the safest weight distribution you can have With this weight distribution hitch, it actually levels out the trailer and the rear of the truck so that it's a more even drop across the front and the rear. So it actually puts less load on the rear, more load on the front, and gives it more of like an OEM driving feel, as if you didn't have a trailer on it. And this thing actually drives really nicely with a trailer on it. It's super smooth. You know, the only thing that it lacks is acceleration, but that's to be expected with a over 10,000 pounds between the two and 240 horsepower and a V8. All right, so I know that we digressed a little bit there, a lot of it actually, but I have Derek's email pulled up. Just to preface anything, like I said, Derek is an amazing tuner. I have not received the kind of service from any other tuner before. You know, a lot of tuners, they don't give you the time of day to explain things in depth. And Derek didn't even charge me any money at all for the work that he put into this. And this email alone and all the diagnostics he put into this, I would say that's at least 5 hours of labor. But he didn't charge me because he wasn't comfortable charging someone for an unfinished product. And he's 100% calibration specialist, so he doesn't do the repair work like I said. So I gotta take care of that myself and also try to work with the shop that did all the work, because ultimately this isn't on me, because I had a shop go over this car for a whole year, and the fact that I've paid them in full, I've taken this car over 1,000 miles and there and back, 2 round trips, $200 of gas per round trip plus tolls. And you know, yesterday we drove for 12 hours, the other time it was 8 hours. That's a huge investment of my time and resources, trying to get this thing tuned, ultimately to find out that there's still all of these mechanical issues wrong with the car that should have been sorted out from the shop. So let's go ahead, dig into this email. So first, he recommends installing a full-blown Motorsports 36-1 crank trigger kit. So this gives a higher level of accuracy for tuning, because this car is a timing belt engine and there's only one trigger sensor on, I think, the front camshaft. You know, the signal quality in the current one is less than confidence inspiring. Filtering can be applied to a certain extent, but excessive filtering isn't the best way to attack this one. The old reluctor stuff is a huge pain, and having the crank trigger is actually located on the crankshaft allows for a much higher level of precision. So that's what we want when we're trying to bring this car up to the modern day. And that actually has nothing to do with the shop that did the work. That is something that I could have researched before and spoken to a tuner about as far as installing one, but you know, we never talked about putting one in, so I'm gonna have to do that now. The kit runs about $500. I'm just waiting for the store to get back to me as far as install instructions to see if it's something that I can do here or if it's I gotta bring it somewhere. I believe it's gonna come off behind the crank pulley. I think it's a stock crank pulley on this car, so we may as well put in an ATI damper or something like that. Second one, replacing the fuel pressure sensor with a North American market unit. So that's going to be a Honeywell stainless steel, or that's going to be like an AEM 150 PSI sensor. That's coming today. The one that's in there right now is an Apexi Japanese sensor, so not really great to work with, and we'll just put a new one in there because it's easier to tune with a North American scaling sensor. Number 3, and this is a very significant issue. There's a fuel flow restriction somewhere in either the fuel lines, the fuel pump, or the wiring to the fuel pump, or it's related to the 4th issue, which is battery voltage dropping as we go up in RPMs. So I'll start with the battery voltage. So when this thing is climbing up in RPM, starting around 5,000, the voltage starts to drop anywhere from, I think, like 13 and higher, all the way back down to 12. It should be staying at 13.5 or even going up if the alternator is functioning properly. That, I think, is the issue for the voltage drop, is the alternator. So we have a brand new DC power billet 180 amp alternator coming sometime next week. We ordered it from HQ Engineering. They're NSX specialists out in California. And usually these alternators are 2 to 3 weeks build time, but we were able to get one shipped out the next day. I guess they had all the parts laying around, they just had to put it together. So I got lucky there. We're gonna put in the new alternator, the fuel pressure sensor. Everything is already coming. Fuel pressure is another issue. So either the wiring for the fuel pump is compromised and we have to replace the wiring somewhere. We have a Walbro 525 fuel pump. That should suffice for 750 horsepower. We were barely making 500 wheel on 93 at 12 psi, so the fuel pump shouldn't be the bottleneck there. We have 6 AN fuel lines to and from the pump back to the tank, but the issue is that we have the stock fuel rails that utilize Banjo fittings, and there's also a Banjo fitting on the fuel hanger for the feed line, which is also a big bottleneck, because Banjo fittings, you guys know how that works. It's kind of like an eye hole and a bolt goes through it, and then inside the bolt in the eye hole there's another smaller hole where the fluid goes through, like your brake lines are usually Banjo fittings. So we have a total of 3 Banjo fittings on the fuel system, and instead of like a traditional AN hose where it's straight through, there's no restriction of any kind, we think that the Banjo fittings are causing restriction. They definitely are restrictive, but I don't think it's as restrictive to the point that the regulator completely shut off fuel back to the fuel tank. There is literally zero fuel returning into the tank because the engine, the injectors, are using all of that fuel, which is still surprising because 6 AN hose is good for 1,000 horsepower. 6 AN fuel rails are good for 1,000 liters per hour, and that fuel pump is good for 750 horsepower, let's say. Check the fuel pump wiring, check the relay, probably even just replace the relay and all the wiring associated with it. But I want to install the alternator first, the new one, before we dig into changing all of that, because maybe the fuel pressure issue is related to the alternator. So there's a lot of things that are, working against each other, and it's hard to really pinpoint the exact issue. He says that the injectors are too big for the fuel rails. So we have 2200cc Bosch injectors. That is overkill for my setup right now. It will definitely outflow the fuel pump, and they're good for 6 AN fuel rails. These are stock fuel rails, and we're probably going to get the Deechworks fuel rail kit. They're not too expensive. Comes with both fuel rails, 6 AN on both sides, and pretty straightforward install. So for like 200 something bucks, we're going to throw that in there, put on all new fuel rail fittings, 6 AN, and hoses to and from the regulator and the fuel filter, which is in the feed line. The only issue is taking the fuel tank back out and replacing that Banjo fitting is gonna suck, because unlike most cars where you can access the fuel pump from the cabin, this doesn't have an access panel for the fuel pump hanger. You have to drop the whole fuel tank, which you gotta put on a lift and get a buddy to help you lower it down. It's pretty annoying, but there's only a couple gallons of gas in there right now, so that should be good for the issues that try to diagnose. The last thing we have here, the intake air temperature is getting out of control. So the mailman actually just showed up with the fuel pressure sensor that we were talking about, so that's cool. We can install that now. The intake temperatures, they were skyrocketing on the dyno on a single pull. So the intake temp would start around 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and it would jump all the way to 150 by the time it reached red line, which is insane. It shouldn't have a 60 degree temperature differential from start to finish. I think we're like 95% sure why the intake temps are so high, because we put a brand new custom fabricated intercooler right up here that is rated for 750 horsepower, and it's got a great flowing heat exchanger in the front. The issue itself is actually the size of the heat exchanger. So this is a water to air intercooler. It's not like a traditional air to intercooler where air passes through it, cools the air in your charge pipe. This, the hot air from your turbo, goes through a water cooled, like miniature intercooler. They're like this big because the water ones don't need as much surface area because it's cooled by liquid. The water that cools the intercooler is actually goes through a smaller radiator in the front of the bumper called a heat exchanger. And right now the one that we have is about the size of an iPad, so like this big. I think it was actually an oil cooler or a power steering cooler that was used for the heat exchanger. At the time that it was done, this car was probably only designed to only make 350 wheel horsepower or something like that. The car is now making 490 on a low boost tune. So you can imagine how inefficient that heat exchanger is now for this power level. So we're gonna go from one that's like this big to one that's like this big. And he even said so himself that it needs to be like 5 times the size as what I have now. And this is a single pass, meaning the water only flows through, I think, once. We should get a dual pass so that the water flows through twice. More cooling, more power. So Science of Speed, another S2000 and NSX specialist shop out in Arizona, they sell a heat exchanger kit. However, theirs is only good up to 550 horsepower, and we're already there, so getting theirs wouldn't help us in achieving 700, which is what we want on E85. So there's a single pass exchanger, about 26 inches, and we need probably a dual pass. So I know Mishimoto makes one that's rated for 750 horsepower, and Mishimoto gets a bad rep because a lot of people say they're just Chinese parts marked up with their name on it, and a lot of that is true. A lot of their parts are made in China, but you know, their designs are done in-house. I'm sure they have pretty good quality control. We sell a lot of Mishimoto products, and I've never actually had an issue with any of them. And CSF, they're a company, I think, in Cali. Their products are great. They make cooling products for German cars, Japanese cars. I have a CSF full aluminum radiator in the Evo now. That thing is beautiful. I have one in my Supra, and I don't have one in this car. This still has an OEM radiator, which I'm surprised I haven't changed out yet, but we haven't had any coolant heating issues at all yet. So I'll probably do that at some point. But they make a dual pass heat exchanger. I got to find out what the horsepower rating is, but it should be 700 or higher. So we got to pull the front bumper off, take measurements, and see what would fit behind there. Because I know there's some AC components and there's also some plastics behind the bumper that might prevent us from being able to fit a massive heat exchanger in there. And the bigger the heat exchanger, the more airflow that's blocked from the radiator, because the radiator sits behind the heat exchanger. So then we might need a bigger radiator, or we might need to turn the fans for the radiator on sooner than where it is now. But these are all things that can be done in the Haltech. We went over all of the issues with the tune and why it can't be tuned. So the last thing here is the ignition switch. So I thought I had fixed that by tightening the screws out on the back of the ignition switch under the steering column, but it's still having the issue. It like fixes itself for the first day and then the issues come back. So we ordered a new ignition switch, OEM from Honda in Japan, and we're gonna put that in there. Hopefully it's the same part. I think, order the left-hand drive version. They shouldn't be different right-hand drive to left-hand drive, but they could be. So the ignition switch was actually a big issue because the car would keep shutting off, and you can't really do a proper cold start because you would start it, it would fire up, run for a second, and then shut off, on and on and on. And then on the dyno, he said it didn't shut off, but like moving around a parking lot, if you hit like your knee against the key or something like that, he said the car shut off on him in the parking lot. So that's a big issue. We obviously got to change that out too, but that's really it. Yeah, that was a lot of detail, a lot of information, but these are all things that him and I discovered over the course of the few days that he was working on it, and now we got a lot of homework to do to get it to where it needs to be in order for us to bring it back to Derek. Ultimately, I feel bad bringing him, a car that needs all this work, but these are things that we didn't really find out until we started to turn the power levels up, because this car has never really been turned up to that level. The car never made near 500 horsepower ever in my ownership. This car was running crappy ever since I bought it, and it's never ran great. Even the first time I had a dyno tune, the car was super rich. It was so rich that I was shooting flames constantly, and so much fuel was getting dumped into the exhaust that it fouled my brand new wideband sensor. Those are like not cheap, they're $80 give or take, but this car has never been proper. And I was so emotional yesterday. I was telling my buddies, people were replying to my Instagram stories, telling me to expose the shop. I don't want to do that yet, if at all, because I'm still talking to the person who did all the work, and he's helping me get through the issues, and he is reasonable, and he's done a lot of work for no cost. And a lot of you guys will say that you shouldn't have paid at all, but the work that he actually did, not all of it was great, but at the end of the day, it probably was close to double what I did pay him. But here we are. You get what you pay for. You gotta learn it the hard way. And ultimately, I wish I had brought it to Wistar, the guys fixing my Evo right now, and that car will be back next week. But they weren't open when I had dropped this car off yet. So if I had waited 6 more months, I probably could have brought this to a one-stop shop and had everything done perfectly. Oh, and the speedo and the tachometer still don't work, so gotta figure that out. But that's the story. Last couple days of 2023, and here we are. So this is probably the last video for the year. Hope you guys have a very joyful, happy new year. Great health and happiness to all of you guys. Make sure that you're doing what you love and you love what you do. I learned a lot of things this year, honestly, and I gotta say, happiness is something that I strive for in everything that I do. But that's it, guys. Happy New Year. Happy and healthy New Year. We'll see you in 2024. Peace out, guys.